Back in the day, writing content was a pretty sweet gig. You would write a few articles, pen a few blogs, and whilst you probably wouldn't be making six figures a year, you could take home 40, 50, 60k fairly easily, and you wouldn't have to work that much. It's the kind of gig where you'd work maybe like 4 to 6 hours a day, you might even do a 4-day week, you could travel a lot, you had good clients, and actually it was pretty good fun. Unfortunately, those days are definitely gone. Making a living as a content writer is very, very hard, if not possibly impossible. There's definitely some content writers who've been doing it a long time. They're high profile names, they've got their connections, they've got their reputation, all that kind of stuff. They're still doing okay, but even those guys are starting to struggle. So what I want to do in this video is talk you through what you should do if you are a content writer or are looking to be one, in terms of how you can turn that tide, how you can still make really good money, and actually what the better thing to do instead is. So before I wrote copy, I actually started out as a content writer. It was, I think about 2011 was the first time I ever got paid for a piece of content, maybe 2010. But I was a struggling personal trainer and I was very slowly building a mobile personal training business. But I'd always been inspired by, back in the day, the fitness blogs on places like T Nation and Elite FTS. I'd read people like Nate Green, like Tony Gentlecore, Christian Thibodeau, Dave Tate, all of those guys. And I was massively inspired because basically I wanted what they had. I could envisage myself having this lifestyle where, yeah, I might still train people and that kind of thing, but most of my income would come from writing and most of my time would be spent writing. And so I started to make some moves to make that happen. And in 2010, 2011, I actually picked up a gig as a content writer at livestrong.com. At the time, that was a big content site and they're run by a company called Demand Media. Now, Demand Media used writers on a freelance basis. And I started off doing probably about 3 or 4 articles a week for them. And it wasn't massively paid by any means. I think it was $20 an article. Once you'd written about 100 articles for them, you could move up to about $25. And then I think eventually I wound up on about $30 an article. It's about £20. And okay, that was worth more then than it is now. There's a 15, 16 year time difference here, but still it wasn't massive money. But what I found was I could churn out articles pretty quickly. So back in those days, I was doing probably, at the time that I got to do more content writing, I was probably doing about 40 to 52 sessions of PT a week. That's my busiest week, was 52 sessions. But I could still do kind of 30 or 40 articles. And so over the course of a couple of years, I built up to seeing about 2,500 content articles for Livestrong. Alongside that, I was writing for other sites as well. Some of it was paid, some of it was free. And I was doing a lot of the free stuff to build my business. And to be honest, it was great. I started to slowly build up that side of the business. And every time I had a personal training client who, for whatever reason, decided not to carry on, rather than replacing them, I just wrote more content. And things were great. And then all of a sudden in 2013, I think it was, I got an email from Demand Media saying, we believe you've plagiarized a reference, therefore we are terminating your writing permissions immediately. So they completely shut down my account, they closed my email, they basically said, you've got no recourse here, we're letting you go. Now it turns out, I saw a few months later that actually they were just making massive cutbacks. So I think it was an easy way to let me go, because for the record, I didn't plagiarize a reference. I got a book title slightly wrong in my referencing, which was a mistake that I made, and I will hold my hands up. But anyway, I was gone. That was that. And that was kind of how I got into copy. So that's my backstory in it. And sometimes people say to me, oh, well, I know you say it didn't pay amazingly well, and I know you were only doing it on the side, but how do I get into doing that myself? Because it still sounds pretty cool. £30, $30, whatever an article. I could do 5 or 6 of those a day. I would be set. And unfortunately, my answer is basically you can't. There are some content writers who still do very well, but I'd argue that they're the people who are probably more journalists. They're writing for big online magazines, big platforms, that kind of thing. And that brings me round to the idea of, well, if you want to be a content writer or you were a content writer, what can you do instead? And to preface this, I think I'll give you an idea of the 3 levels of income that I see that you can make from writing. Now, this has changed over the years, but level 1, you have sort of content and low-level copy. So this is the level where you were doing the kind of stuff that I just mentioned that kind of doesn't even exist anymore, or you're writing basic copy for clients. So that might be social media captions, it might be some very basic email stuff. So it's not launches, it's not sequences, it's just broadcast emails, essentially giving people stuff to read. It might encompass SEO copy as well to a degree, but it's the kind of thing that is very much a commodity. Now, a few years ago, you could still make an okay living doing that. Again, not a 6-figure income, but 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60k a year, that was doable. These days, that's just not going to happen. It might swing back, but for the time being, because there's not much of a revenue outcome attached to that kind of work, people are just outsourcing it to AI. So yes, you would very likely do a better job than AI, but the market's not appreciating that. It's going to take a couple more years before people go, actually, this AI copy is pretty garbage and it's really affecting my reputation, my sales, that kind of thing, before that level 1 type gig is reinstated again. So for now, I wouldn't even bother about that. If you're thinking that's how I'm going to make money, yeah, you can pick up some gigs here and there, but honestly, it's not going to be a valuable income stream. At level 2, you've got the content and copy that kind of has more of an impact on someone's bottom line. So that will be things like writing ad copy. It will be email launch sequences, email autoresponders, sales letters, via sales webinars, that kind of thing. And similarly, that's kind of changed in the last few years as well. A couple of years ago, before the mass adoption of AI, that used to be the kind of thing where a 5K to 20K a month income, that was, I hesitate to say easy, but that was definitely doable if you had good skill. These days, it's probably more of a 5 to 10K a month income stream. Again, purely because copy has become slightly commoditized and a bit devalued because of AI. That's going to swing back quicker, and we're already seeing this. So you're seeing like Anthropic paying big bucks. I think it was like 300K a year for a creative strategist. You're seeing a lot more roles for kind of copywriters to come back, especially in the realms of e-com when it's highly competitive, and those guys just need their copy to convert. So I'm really bullish on this coming back as a great way of making a living for writers. It's definitely more copy than content, but that's kind of your level 2. So right now it's maybe a 5 to 10K a month income stream. It will go back up again, but if you are kind of just a content writer, so to speak, with some basic writing skills, if you want to move into that bracket, you really need to start developing your direct response abilities and get more into copy rather than content. And then at the top, you've got what I would call more of the strategist type position. This is the one that I definitely recommend more people look to now, where you are still writing copy. You might be taking charge of someone's Facebook ads or meta ads. Maybe you're in charge of their launches, that kind of thing. But it's definitely more of an ideas generating position. So you need to understand things like funnel structure. You need to understand levels of awareness. You need to understand why people buy. And it's a much more nuanced, much more developed skill than just writing. So at this level, your income is kind of uncapped, because you'll often get a really good base rate for what you do. It might be kind of 10, 15, 20 grand a month. And there will often be performance upsides on top of that as well. So if you're working with a big company, a company that's spending lots on ads, that's running lots of traffic, that's got some really well converting offers, you can earn very, very well. And you could maybe have like 2, 3, 4 of those positions at once if you work in a fractional CMO capacity. It takes a lot more to get there. I'm not saying it's easy. You're going to have to study. You're going to have to kind of probably get some sort of mentoring or coaching, spend some time inside businesses that are actively growing. But that's kind of your third level. And that's where I would say most people want to look to head right now. So those are your 3 levels. Now, the whole point of this video was, if you were looking to be a content writer, or if you are a content writer, what should your next move actually be? So with those 3 levels in mind, like I've said, level 1, obsolete, don't even bother about it. It might come back, it might not. But if you're looking to do that, it should really be like a hobby business or something you do on the side. Or even, I still write content, right? I write for social media, I write a blog for myself, I publish Google Docs. I do that purely for enjoyment. There is some reputation building aspect to that as well, because I think that people are seeing the value in those who can create really good, really engaging long form content, but it's not going to pay you directly. So that level 1 stuff, just don't bother about it, move on. The level 2, I think, is where you're going to start seeing traction, see it relatively quickly if you've been around that content game. Now, the big thing here is that a lot of the time people think, oh, I'm only a content writer. Switching to copy is this massive undertaking. And yeah, there's an element that you will have to learn new skills, but actually you're probably subconsciously doing a lot of good copy already. So if you think about what content should do, it needs to hook someone in. It needs to have like open loops so people keep reading. It needs to have frequent subheads so that people are skim reading, they're drawn back in, they want to start reading a bit more. It needs to have good calls to action. It needs to have a clear message. All of that stuff is very transferable to copy. And if you look at a great piece of copy, oftentimes like the first 80 or 90% of that is effectively content. Like you might have some mini calls to action, you might have some NLP based stuff in there to kind of trigger people's desires or tap more into a problem, that kind of thing. But I would say there's very little difference between a really strong piece of content and a strong piece of copy. Where the difference will lie is generally in the end or the close. And with content, your close is often just giving people something to think about, sharing a lesson, giving an insight. It might be redirecting them somewhere else, but you're not necessarily making a sale. The reason why copy is called direct response copy is because you're looking for a direct response. You're looking for someone to buy something, someone to send you more info, maybe they take a quiz, maybe they register for something, all that kind of stuff. So as a content writer, your focus should be on getting really good at that. You already know how to do the majority of a good email or a good sales letter because you've got experience writing content. So start to look at, well, how can I write great closes? How can I look at positioning, messaging? How can I nail that crossroads position? What do I need to know about value stacking, about price anchoring? Now, if those are new terms, I totally get that, but they're actually pretty easy to learn. You could honestly go away, give yourself maybe a month and spend 2 days on each of those elements. Within that time, you'd be a pretty accomplished copywriter. So if you're looking to get to that level 2 kind of mark, that 5 to 10K a month mark, doing some email stuff, doing some ads, doing some sales letters, that would be the approach I'd take. All that said, I still think whether you're a content writer or a copywriter starting out, the best thing to do is to shoot for that level 3. Shoot for where you're getting paid for your ideas. There's a big trend at the moment for creative strategy. And in my opinion, that's kind of just a fancy term for a copywriter who does a little bit more. They're more involved with things like the overall funnel structure. They're more involved with stuff like upsells, downsells, cross sells, like repeat purchases, that kind of stuff. And they bring more ideas to the table as well. They're going to be writing briefs. They're going to be doing creative ideation. They might be briefing designers, videographers, media buyers, that kind of thing. You're taking much more of an active role in growth. Now, some of this does feel a bit scary and a bit new. And I know when I got into doing this, my sort of ethos the whole time I was in copy was, I'm going to write great stuff and I'm going to deliver lots of work to a client, and that's how I get paid. If I want to earn more, I need to do bigger packages. So not just a sales letter, but a sales letter with some email lifts, or a sales letter with different stuff to test, right? And I would get paid more, but I'd be doing more work. Going into more of that strategy, that getting paid for ideas role, it's a weird paradox because you often do a lot less actual work. I often get paid now for getting on a Zoom call with someone for an hour and sending them a one-page document. It's bizarre to me still that I get paid the same for that as I used to get paid for writing a whole sales letter that would take a week. But some of this is just a mindset switch, and you have to get yourself into the frame of mind of thinking people aren't necessarily paying for stuff these days. They're not paying for lots of copy, lots of content. They're actually paying for a result. And actually, if you can get that result for someone by doing a lot less, that's going to be useful for you, and it's also going to be useful for them. Like, people don't pay for stuff anymore, they pay for outcomes. So even if you are relatively new to copywriting, to content writing, that's the direction I would look to head, because that's the kind of thing that AI will not replace. Like I've said in loads of videos already, I still think we're going to see a swing back to conventional copywriting, even conventional content writing. But for the here and now, it pays to kind of learn that extra skill and get paid for your ideas. And what I really like about this is that as a content writer, if you've written stuff for different platforms, for different mediums, in different niches, you know how to tell a story, you're going to have loads of these skills already. It's the kind of thing where sometimes you have to sit down and write out all the cool stuff you've done to see that you know a lot of this stuff. And when I do this with people, it's often surprising because they'll see a role like creative strategist and think, well, surely that's something you need a specific degree for, or you need to have been in certain positions inside a business. And yeah, there's an argument to say that that could be useful, but actually your experience up to this point, especially if you've got a diverse background in what you've been writing about, you're going to have a lot of the skills there already. So like I said, for moving to that level 2, this might be a case where to get really good at copy, moving from content to copy, it might be a 30-day process for a couple of hours a day. To move to that creative strategy, that get paid for your ideas level, it might be more like a 90 to 120-day process, but just map it out. Think, right, what do I need to do to get from where I am now to where I want to be? What skills do I need to learn? What types of businesses do I need to study? What else would help me get there? Map it out, and you'll see that actually you can break it down into chunks. So start listening to podcasts, buy a couple of courses, speak to people inside businesses as well. You don't have to buy a full years-long mentoring program with someone. You could just pay people for a call. Find people who've done this kind of stuff. Say to, look, how much do you charge for an hour? Love to sit down with you, pay you to get your insights and your experience. A lot of people might even do that for free for you if they can see that you are eager to learn and you want to put yourself out there and get better results. So all that said, unfortunately, if you want to make a living as a content writer, I do think it's really, really hard. I try and be positive about this stuff, and I still think that the world needs great writers. Some people will absolutely thrive, and if you're amazing at what you do and you've got a great network, yes, writing content is still a viable career. But as more of a biz op type thing or break it into a newbie, it's really, really tough. So look for that level 2, look for that level 3. Like I said, it's a longer learning process. There's more involved as well. There's more at stake. It's probably going to be higher stress. But for me, the payoff to that is massively worth it. You earn more money, you work with better clients, you get more freedom, and actually getting paid for your ideas rather than just writing thousands of words is really, really cool. So if that video has been useful, let me know. Have you got any questions? Feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll also put a link down there for ABP Mastery. That's my paid course. So totally upfront with the fact that yes, there is a fee to do it. But have a read through the page, see if it vibes with you. Any questions on that, let me know, and I'll catch you in the next video.